stand against these pipelines. All right, let me see. Yeah, we have Robin Kuhn is with us. Robin Kuhn lives in Levy County. The pipeline is not only running right through his property, being of Lakota heritage, right?
Cherokee.
Cherokee
Well, with the
heritage.
Seminole tribe here.
Robin's home and tribal graveyard has been desecrated, and which is right next to a wetland. And last of all, our guest speaker is Marilee Melwitz Judson. Marilee lives in Fort White and has actively stood against this pipeline for several years. She's a campaign organizer with Florida Sierra Club, who incidentally, along with other natural resource protective agencies, have lawsuits against these companies. And so at this point, I will turn this over to Marilee.
Well, good afternoon. I just got out of a meeting in Palaca about Sleepy Creek and Adena Ranch. How many of you know about what's going on there with, So, I don't know if this is good. So we had 125 people there, and I'll tell you, the most interesting thing with the work that I do as a campaign organizer is getting people out. Because it's about your environment, it's about your livelihood, it's about your landscapes, the places that you live in. And in North Florida, I moved here in 2002, and I moved to the Santa Fe River because I thought it'd be a great place to raise my children. I had one child and a baby on the way. And I lived in between all the springs, the heartland of the Santa Fe River even, but the heartland of the Floridan aquifer and also of the springs in Florida, where we have the most abundant springs anywhere else in the state and technically in the country at that point in time. Where I live is between Poe Springs and Rum Island and Blue Springs. So as many of you have probably traveled the river and know of that area. And when I went out there with my big old fat pregnant belly and sat there on the shoreline, I met more people sitting there on the shoreline waving to people in boats that went by than anywhere else. And I realized at that point in time that not only do people enjoy it, but this river needs protection. We were witnessing about 4 years after I moved here, water bottle plants coming through, and that's how our Santa Fe River got its upstart, was because of the bottled water plants. And we stopped 4 of them because of citizens. Without the citizens, we would not have been able to stop those plants. They would be existing today. That's how important you all are. And so Sabal Trail eventually started to rear its ugly head through gossip, through talk, through people like you talking to your neighbors, because they weren't posting it in the newspapers, they weren't putting it online. But what we found out was that the Ichitucknee, they wanted to go through the Ichitucknee on the FP&L Florida Power and Light corridor, because Florida Power and Light owns that corridor, and they said this is where we're going to go. Well, everybody there got together and said, oh no, because of what? The aquifer, because of the karst. Come back to the karst word in a little while, but they were able to move it and push it over. Well, you know what happens then? It goes into somebody else's backyard. And that's when we stepped in more, went through our Santa Fe River's backyard at that point in time, solely in that area. And the homeowner associations reached out to us and said, hey, can you help us? And we said, of course we can, because it was a spring shed. It did have springs where they were going to be cutting through. Well, the dilemma we faced at the time, Sabal Trail, the pipeline company, which is being built by Spectra Energy, they said, you have to put it somewhere. We're going to do this. You have to put it somewhere. So our Santa Fe River wrote a letter based on the science that we had at the time, and we said, well, if it has to go somewhere, and we went, at that point in time, we were doing scoping meetings, and we were doing public meetings. They were outreach meetings that I don't know if Newberry had any, but Dunellen had one. I don't think Newberry had one. Branford had one. Live Oak had one. I mean, I went to them all. Jasper had one. We even had one in Lake City, and the pipeline's not even going through Lake City. That was an oddity to us. So we went to these meetings, and sometimes there would be like a dog and pony show, and there'd be these big maps in the room. And you'd go over to the map in your wisdom of what your property and what your neighborhood looked like, and all of these blue-shirted people would surround you. And they would say, yep, we're going to put it somewhere, and we would be like looking at these topographical maps going, oh God, no, not here, this is all karst. It's obvious from the satellite. You've seen these maps, it's all karst. And we were like, not here. Can you go? And we'd look at over at I-95 corridor, and we'd look at I-10 and 75 corridor, and we'd say, can't you put it along the roads? Can't you put it above the waterways instead of in the waterways? Can't you put it along the bridges? All of these ideas they nixed. We said, well, how about the Gulf Stream? There's a pipeline out in the Gulf Stream. How about if you do another floating pipeline? And that would have been like another problem for the environment, and that got nixed. And so in the end, they said, this is where we're going to put it. We're going to put it in co-location corridors. Co-location means it's running alongside another utility. Another, in Mr. Coons and Robin's situation, he has a utility line on his property. It's an overhead. It's not combustible. It's not going to blow up. Might tip over in the wind, maybe. Probably not. But it's not going to blow up. Well, they ran that thing right next to that corridor. And they couldn't put it under the lines for some reason. Who knows why. So they took another 50 feet of his land. So he already had a 100-foot, maybe 75-foot easement with the overhead, and they took another 50 feet. Probably 25, because they were trying to accommodate you and your loved ones, but I think landowners. Anyway, so this is how it all started. Through lots of conversations, through lots of scoping, through lots of public information. A lot of landowners, but you all know, not everybody talks to their neighbors. The first. So, well, it might be going through your property. You may not get along with your neighbor. You may not or you may live 50 miles, or not 50 miles, let's say 50 acres from the next landowner, because this is a rural pipeline. You know, big open tracts of land, and you may not communicate with your neighbor very regularly, or your neighbor might live in another state. So you don't see that person anyway. So the point to this is, there wasn't a lot of public information. Spectra Energy did not have to tell his neighbor. Even if it went 25 feet, which it does on some instances, 50 feet from somebody's bedroom window, if it's on his land, he doesn't have to tell you. Spectra Energy didn't. So that's one reason why a lot of people don't know about this. Unless you were paying attention to the scoping meetings and the public information meetings, you didn't know. They didn't have to tell you. So, fast forward a little bit. Now the public is involved. As many of you know, there's encampments, there's protests, there's demonstrations. That's all to get the word out. Without those actions, many people still would not know. The press wasn't enough. If you were around back then, it was in the press. If you look in Google, wonderful tool of Google, it's there. Gainesville Sun wrote about it. I know because I was quoted often. We had op-eds in there. Tampa, I think, wrote about it. Orlando wrote about it. They're in the press, but apparently it wasn't enough. What started to bring more press out was people demonstrating, getting arrested. That one really, a veteran getting arrested made us national news. Wasn't intentional. That guy didn't want to get arrested. He had no intention of getting arrested. He was crossing the road. And the police, for some reason, targeted him, put him in handcuffs, and arrested him. So, despite all of that, that's how you know. You might know from other purposes or other reasons. The camps are a big part. Let's see. Am I connected? There we go. The camps. Here we go. Oh, that's.
You want me to turn lights down?
Yeah, lights could go down for this one. Lower this. I'll scoot down. I don't think it can be raised. And so this was one of the original camps that got started. It was Sacred Water Camp, and since then, like you heard about Cindy has Water is Life Camp, and now there's 4 more camps that are being located on state-owned lands, on state park lands. They're going to start working on them in terms of encampment very soon. And those camps, like I said, will be on state park Cindy's is private land that she's allowed people to come and learn about how to stop Sabal Trail. Sacred Water was the same type of situation where it was on private land up at the Swanee River State Park, or it's miles away from the Swanee River State Park, but it is on the Swanee River where Sacred Water is. And so what I had to do to, partly for me to understand what I was trying to fight, because I have to come and talk to so many people, I started going and witnessing and seeing what was going on the corridor itself. Listen, there are 6 different construction crews. When you see those maps, there's 6 maps. Each one represents a construction crew. 6, now, when you read about it in the paper, they're going to talk about a 515-mile pipeline, that's Sabal Trail. But the reality is, it's 5 pipelines. From Alabama to a part in Alabama is the Hillaby expansion. The Hillaby is a pipeline out of the Marcellus Shale. The Marcellus Shale is in northeastern United States. There's a pipeline shipping frac gas to a bulk transfer station in Alabama. In Alabama, they're building several pipelines from that bulk transfer station to get that frac gas out of the Marcellus Shale and other shale formations that also get bulk transferred to that place in Alabama. And from there, they send that gas out to where needs are to be met. We'll get into that. So the Hillaby expansion connects to Sabal Trail. Sabal Trail starts in Alabama, 515 miles long, goes through Georgia. Georgia has no need for this gas whatsoever. Alabama's obvious. They have a bulk transfer station there. Early on, we talked about why can't it just, not us, but people that were fighting, why can't it just go from Alabama into Florida? Why does it have to go to Georgia? And if you look at a map, you'll understand what I'm saying. There was no need for that pipeline to go into Georgia. Alabama connects Florida. So, Georgia fought it. They fought it in the legislature. They fought it with their elected officials. They fought it locally. Albany, Georgia, this is this lovely woman, Gloria Gaines. She's a county commissioner. She fought it because of these environmental justice issues. So this pipeline right over here, this is the corridor right over here, is an economically deprived community. And it is an African American community from early on, like early slave people that had generationally been born and raised in this community. Very poor. So she fought hard, and so did the commissioners in Albany, to move this. Got nowhere. They're building a compressor station right back here behind the woods where you can't see it from the road. But the community over here is going to hear it, breathe it, know it. It's going to be in their backyard forever. So we're still fighting this with Gloria. This environmental justice issue is also a huge component to these pipelines because they go through environments they can't fight. Poor people can't fight the way rich city people can. And an interesting story with her situation, and I went and met her, it was supposed to go to, the compressor station was supposed to go to a more affluent kind of community, but they didn't like the way it looked from the road, so that's how it ended up here. So even in certain parts of this, more wealthy people were able to move it to a place that was more rural because the rural people can't fight it as easily. Very interesting. I learned a lot about stuff from Gloria. Gloria's an amazing woman. So this is what it looks like. And so I was just explaining the Hillaby, the first one. It's a little breakup system that connects Hillaby expansion into Sabal. Sabal's the red one. Down here in Citrus County line, this pipeline is going to break away in the Marion County area of Dunellen. And it's going to have a little pipe, well, I shouldn't say little pipeline, it's going to have a pipeline, 24-inch, right? Cutting from Sabal Trail to Duke Energy's power plant. Also, we found out in this community, there is an LNG export facility in the works. LNG is liquid natural gas. It's when you basically freeze the gas to put it in containers for being shipped out for as a commodity. So that's so 1, 2, 3 pipelines, Citrus County, and then further down, and we can talk about every county going down, but further down in the Osceola area, just south of Orlando, there's another small pipeline going to another power plant, and that's called the Hunters Creek Line. So that's the fourth pipeline. The fifth pipeline is this blue one, and that's going down to Martin County to FP&L's power plant, and peaking stations are also part of it. Y'all know what peaking stations are? It's when you use a lot of power at home and it starts to brown out, and they'll run a peaking station to send power to the grid. So peaking stations are also associated with this. Well, what we're also seeing, and I don't know if I have this slide, this is, I think I can move on from here. So this whole thing is called the Southeast Market Pipelines Project. Listen, when we got involved with this back in 2013, it was so confusing to us. We'd walk into a room and we'd start talking about Sabal, and then the blue shirt people were all like, well, that's not Sabal, and that's not this, and that's not that. Well, we had to get all of our words proper, and to us, we were like, listen, it's just Sabal to us. Come on, give us a break. Why do we have to have exact names of whatever we're talking about? Because nobody calls it the Southeast Market Pipelines Project, which is truly what it is, interestingly enough. But for all intents and purposes, Sabal. And what we found is people with Sabal, and they did this intentionally, we believe, just like the Palmetto Pipeline, people think it's a trail. People think it's a bike trail, a walking trail. They don't associate it with a 36-inch combustible, blow-up type pipeline, that it's a compressed gas pipeline. Along this corridor, these white blocks here, this one here, this one here, this one here, and I think there's one right here. Those are compressor stations, just like I was talking about with Albany. Those are where a turbine pressurizes this gas in the 36-inch pipe that's laid on the landscape in a corridor fashion, and they get to a place like Hildreth, which isn't really Hildreth either, by the way, it's O'Brien. They like to confuse us a lot. So they get to a place called O'Brien, which on the map says Hildreth. Anyway, out in a rural area, and it's this 90-acre piece of property that's been cleared. Lime rock's been trucked in, tons and tons and tons, probably millions and millions of tons of lime rock, because it's in a karstic, sinkhole-laden environment. They brought in all this fill dirt, and that thing is going to be this massive structure, and you can see one of these in a smaller version on the FGT line just outside of Bell, between Bell and not Newberry, between Bell and Trenton, off that 129. We drove by it the other day. And that thing runs 24/7. So it has a low hum, audible hum, and it releases methane. That's what's in this pipeline. Gas, methane, methane gas. So the methane that's in this pipeline, the gas methane pipeline, is fracked methane gas. So there is a certain amount of fracked material still in that pipeline, or in the gas makeup, the makeup of this gas. So at these compressor stations, as a result of the turbines working and the compression of the gas, they release gas every once in a while. There's a certain amount of gas that gets released into the environment. And so it causes nosebleed, it causes health issues, especially with that poor neighborhood that's so close to it. They're going to have the brunt of all of it. And it also releases the methane into the air. And I don't care how you feel about global warming or global impacts, methane creates more warmth than burning carbon, burning coal. Just to be very clear about that. Proven. All right. So, is a habitat system that will never be restored. So, how many of you know about the Marjorie Harris Cross Barge Canal, the Panama Canal system that was going to run through the state of Florida? Well, back in the 1960s, they were going to put a Panama Canal through Florida because they didn't want the vessels to go all the way around the tip of Florida to go do their business in the South America. So they decided that they were going to cut a channel through the state. And they did. Well, they did half of it. Just like this pipeline, they did half of it. That's where we want to be. We want to get them to stop that are mammals, but also plants and also other biota that we don't even know because we haven't done the studies that really needed to be done. This was mostly done in an office somewhere in Washington, D.C. or in an office in Florida. When they started walking the trail with us, I don't know if I have these in here, when they started walking the trail with us, or when we asked them to, we found sinkholes. We had 2 geologists, and I say we loosely, we just represent citizens. Many groups were involved. Walls, the Walls group, and it's a long name, Withlacoochee area licks, Walls. Walls actually had the wherewithal to hire 2 geologists, professional geologists that did not know each other. And also had Ted Yoho, Representative Yoho, Senator Nelson's aide, many county and local county commissioners and city commissioners walked the corridor in the Swanee River State Park. When he walked that corridor with these people, he explained to them, we have active sinkholes. We have habitats that are being destroyed. They are not in that EIS. Now, Walls brought forward a DOA, Department of Administrative Hearings process, against the Environmental Protection Agency of Florida, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And that didn't go the way we wanted it to go because he had to prove standing. And he had to prove these very, they weren't arbitrary, but at the same time they were legal ways to deny our DOA. And so we had a 3-day hearing. There was a lot of great information in there, but we ended up losing the DOA. And as a result of losing that DOA, we could not tell them about the geology report. We could not tell them about the EPA report that first came out that said it was going to harm our waterways. And so we were left kind of in a terrible place with the DOA where it never really proved anything. But believe me, lawsuits were filed. So I see this image a lot lately, really interestingly used against our arguments. So people on social media will say, what pipeline are you worried about, right? And that's my response, of course, all of them. This is the United States, y'all. If you all have not taken a look at what we're doing with fossil fuel in the United States, this is a great spaghetti mess of an example. The fact that we have, this is just gas, by the way. This is not oil. We have plenty of oil and plenty of gasoline, which is different than gas. How about natural gas or methane? I hate to even call it natural gas. I'd like to call it frack gas. So even in Florida, these are all the pipelines already in Florida. We do not need another one. These pipelines are not at capacity. We found that out early on. The 3 that come into Florida, Gulfstream, SONAT, Southern Natural, FGT, Florida Gas Transmission, are not at capacity. If they were at capacity, then a need would have been based on that truism. But it's true that they're not. And we have that information. It's described. We even tried to bring that up in the DOA.
Marilee?
Yes.
And how old are they and how long are they supposed to last? I mean, they're pretty much at the end of their life.
That's a great.
And they're running what? New gas pipeline beside old ones even, correct?
That's right. And so the old ones are the ones we're all concerned about. Because the old ones are the ones that what? Fail, right? Obvious. I mean, how long can something that's metal, sitting in karstic corrosive limestone, operate in nature or in environments? So there's something called a PIG. It's an acronym for something. They run these machines through the pipes to make sure that they're not corroding or they don't have any leaks or there's no problems. I have asked for years for PIG information on the SONAT. SONAT was built in the 1930s. I think it's a 24-inch. 1930s, and I say, well, what year? They don't know. I'm like, how do you not know? If you don't know the year, then how do you know anything about it? So when we found out, initially we said, okay, co-locate with the new pipe. You all know about the new pipe because it looked like a water pipe. Man, when I started getting those calls for that new pipe going to the ground, everybody was telling me water pipes. I go out there, it was already being laid in the ground, call the water management district because I think it's water, right? They said, oh no, gas. I said, how come you didn't tell me? I'm in those meetings all the time. You mean gas? What do you mean? This was 7 years ago. Actually, technically 8 when I first found out about it. They said, we didn't have to tell you because there's something called an interstate and an intrastate. That particular one, you're going to ask me which one that is, and I always get it backwards.
Intra.
That particular one, intra, FGT was using their own corridor. It was also an inside state job. In other words, they didn't have to get approval, it was already approved. It was already approved in the state of Florida. There was no public necessary, nothing. So I was like, well, but it's gas, right? And shouldn't I be concerned about that because it's near my water supply? Sorry, they shrugged their shoulders, well, nothing you can do about it now, it's all done, blah, blah. So when this one came around, we thought, well, because that one was state-of-the-art, our Santa Fe River at the time, state-of-the-art, we will, if we have to put it somewhere, even though we wrote in the end we don't want it anywhere, we prefaced that in the end of our, give-in letter, we said if you have to go somewhere, then we're okay with the co-locating of the FGT one, which was built 7 or 8 years ago, state-of-the-art. Walking out there with the guys, with the FERC guys, and I see it looks like a 4-inch pipe sticking out of the ground with a cap on it that's yellow usually. I said, well, what's that? I said, oh, that's the FGT line. And I said, well, 25 feet over there. I said, what's that? Mathematical.
All right, well, I was told by them, because it's a 36-inch pipeline, it's only 3 feet deep.
That's right.
So they say 7.5 acres each side is the incineration zone where there is absolutely no life left. Half a mile, there'll be damage to you, and this is like the blowout zone. I'm talking about the concussion rate. And then after that, property damage and stuff like that, out to a mile.
Well, I was curious about what area, I think she might have answered, what would trigger an explosion area?
Anything, a leak,
So the pipeline itself, from point A to B, is a continuous explosive area.
no, well, in between the compressor stations, it shuts off, but
Is there more,
No.
is there one area that's more so?
Right.
than